Hello everyone, I am getting ready to start. Let me know if you guys can hear me and see me. I'll give a couple minutes for everybody to pop in here. That way I'm not just talking to myself, getting lonely. Today's topic, while I'm waiting for everybody to come in, and I'll probably restate it, is the top 3 mistakes that riders make positionally and what you can do about it. So these are things that I see people doing very frequently and that I've definitely done myself and struggle with myself as well. They are things that human bodies are prone to doing. And so what I would like to do in this call is explain why they do that and what to do about it, and try to give you some insight into that. But I guess I'll give a few more minutes for folks to pile in. So these are things, I'll go ahead and just get started since there's 2 people watching. Hello everyone. If you can see me and hear me, feel free to comment if you have any questions. If you can't hear me, let me know. I guess you guys can hear me, right? Before I say anything too interesting. Is the audio working? Great. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I'll repeat what I just said. What I would like to talk to you guys about today is the 3 most common positional faults that riders make, whether you're male or female. Some are going to be different depending on your gender and your body's anatomy. But these are 3 things that many people struggle with. I have certainly struggled with them myself, and they have been things that I have also done with my own body, and what I'd like to give you is some insight into why those happen and what to do about that. And hang on one second, I'm going to close the door so you don't hear my dogs barking. Alright. So the first thing that's important to understand before we get talking about these things is that when you get your body up in the saddle, when you take your feet off the ground and you put them in the stirrups and you sit your butt in the saddle, whether you are consciously afraid of riding or fearful of falling or not, your nervous system already is at a higher alarm level, because you're not really designed to be riding horses. You're designed to be walking around on the ground. And what your body is going to seek doing is trying to find your stability. So your nervous system really doesn't care whether you look good, whether you have good form, whether you're looking pretty on a horse. Your nervous system really just cares about keeping you feeling stable. It really wants you to not fall off and not die, right? That's the main goal of your nervous system. And so when you get in the saddle and you start learning to ride, your body is going to subconsciously make some of these mistakes that we make as riders in an effort to keep you from falling down. And where things get a little bit tricky is that your brain and your body are not always in agreement about what should be done. So an example could be you're taking a riding lesson and you're working on getting bend or lead changes or better contact or whatever. If you inherently feel unstable at the nervous system level, your body is going to basically sneak around the back door and keep you stabilized by doing these things. And so I took the liberty of drawing some of these things out for you. So I'm going to turn my camera on and show them to you. And we're going to start with the first one, which is the scrunching leg. So I'll flip my camera around. And here you can see my drawing of the scrunching leg. So this is an example of a rider who is either trying to make the horse go forward or trying to make the horse bend. Regardless, this leg, hope that's kind of obvious. What happens to the scrunching leg rider is that the hip will rotate, and the knee can pinch, the ankle can pinch in, the toe will rotate away from the horse's side, and this leg is, thank you, Andrea, I'm glad you like it. This leg is essentially grinding against the horse's side. And a couple things happen. I'm going to turn back around so you can look at me. Couple things happen when we do that is if I were riding on the horse and I were to simulate that scrunching leg, you can see that my hips become unlevel, and this, my seat bones essentially end up doing this. So my heel grinding in causes my center to become unlevel. So not just my seat bones, but actually my ribs as well. So if I'm doing this, I'm crunching this side, and that's going to make me really feel off kilter. And so in order for me to not fall down, I'm going to have to tension my torso here. I'm going to have to grip with the reins more. It's going to make me more prone to overriding and over aiding because I'm trying to get the horse to do something while feeling unstable. Could be taking a lead, making a bend, getting the horse through a corner, getting the horse just to go forward. Whatever the case may be, the grinding leg comes with an instability through our entire center, and that causes us to do the second thing. I'm going to turn my camera around again. Fun fact, most of these three things are often done together. Some riders are lucky and they only have one or two bad faults, but generally speaking, these are kind of all tied together. So here's the second one. Hope you like my drawing. This one is the pulling inside rein. And, I'm not an expert at drawing, so it's kind of hard to show exactly what I was trying to show, but this rider's torso has twisted to the point where it's pulled the inside rein back. And the horse is not particularly loving it. This causes the horse to rotate and fall on the shoulder. And thank you, Mackenzie. I'm glad you like it. This twisted torso, this inside rein is probably one of the most common faults that riders make. And in an effort, sorry, I'm trying not to make you guys seasick, but I'm trying to make sure you see the drawing and me. So if you're trying to turn the horse to the right, and if your brain thinks the task is to go right, and you do it like this, because my brain just thought, okay, go right. What happens again is the same thing as the scrunching leg, is we end up rotating our torsos, and that makes your center wonky, makes your brain feel unstable, so it's going to continue to squeeze things in. We know that fetal mode essentially brings you in like this. Fetal mode kind of brings you forward and in. Right when you feel unstable, you tend to contract inward. When you're feeling stable, you tend to expand, right? So in an effort to make the horse do something before we're feeling stable, the inside rein often comes too far down and back, causing this rotation. And we are trying to make the horse do something, to turn right, to make a right bend, right circle, whatever the case may be. This position makes it impossible for the horse to be able to move through their center adequately to make that bend because we've basically thrown them on the inside shoulder. And so we have this unlevel center where we're scrunching and pulling and trying to make the horse do something without being centered ourselves. So the inside rein coming down and back is probably one of the most common things. I know I certainly struggled with that a lot. But it comes with this unlevel center. And again, your nervous system really doesn't care if you look good or look like you have good form when you're feeling inherently unstable. It's just trying to complete tasks without you getting falling off the horse or getting into trouble. So these kind of defensive positionings tend to lead to a rotation. One thing that I say a lot in my courses or in the video library when I'm teaching movement is that sinking generally comes with a rotation. So you're not usually going to sink evenly. You're going to sink and rotate, and you're generally going to rotate towards your dominant side. So if you're right-handed, you're more likely to have your right hand get stuck in this backward position, or it's more likely that your right leg is going to be the one that scrunches and doesn't really want to let go. So that sinking and rotation tends to direct you toward where you're strongest, because again, your nervous system really just wants you to be stable. It doesn't necessarily care that you look nice and centered on the horse. So, and this is not a conscious thought. It's not necessarily that you're actually afraid of the horse. You might be. But if you're like me and you don't have riding fear, you still can have nervous system trying to protect you. Nervous system saying we're inherently unstable. We're wobbly over here. We're too tight over here. The movement of this horse is something we can't absorb and we can't manage. And so in order to stay on, we're going to contract things and we're just going to get the job done in the best way we can. So if we have the pulling inside rein that comes with that rotation, that often accompanies the third thing, which is my favorite drawing to show you. And this is the crotch sitting. This is the rotation of the pelvis where the rider has rotated onto the crotch. Now, this is probably most common for women just because of the way that our pelvises are made, but I have certainly seen men do this too. This comes with an arching of the back that makes the seat bones basically shoot out that way. They're not able to be stable like this. They end up doing that. It makes the core completely inactive because the core is basically in a position where it can't work, and it causes us to ride onto our hands way too much. So if we're riding in that position, and you'll have to excuse me for turning you around again, if we're riding in this position, that actually lowers our hands so much that it puts so much on the bars of our mouth. And so this anterior rotation is often accompanied by hand rotation. Not always, but generally speaking, when we end up getting into this position, the hands just want to kind of come with it. And so then the action of our hands tends to be downward on the bars of the horse's mouth. And so we end up widening for stability, or we end up kind of over muscling with our hands. But the thing that all these three positions have in common with each other is that they all force us to over-aid the horse. And they all block the horse from doing what we're wanting them to do in the first place. So if our legs are scrunching, we're actually blocking the horse's rib cage and back from being able to move. And so we're going to be forced to use more leg. If our inside rein is pulling and we're trying to make the horse bend or go around a turn, we're actually throwing them into a shear over their inside foreleg. So we're actually making it impossible for them to bend. If we're sitting on the crotch, we're actually making it impossible for the horse to be responsive to the reins because we're blocking the forehand from being able to do what we're asking it to do. And so this is where we get stuck in this kind of a self-feeding cycle, is that we are over-aiding because we feel like we have to, and so we add more aids because the horse doesn't seem to be responding, and we get stuck in always having to do this much hand or this much leg, and the horse becomes less and less responsive because they become more and more blocked. Some horses can actually just get to the point where they're like, whatever, man, make me, because they're frustrated with the feelings that we're presenting to them. Or they can become overly sensitive to where they start to jig or throw their head up to avoid our hand that they know is coming. Or the concussion on their back starts to make them feel like they have to hollow their back out in order to feel that. So grinding the leg or scrunching one or both legs, super common. Pulling the inside rein backward and down, super common. Tipping onto the crotch, super common as well. Those are not the only faults out there, obviously, but these are the ones that I certainly struggled with. I had to work very hard to fix them, and they're very common. And again, the main reason that these things happen is because our center is not stable on the horse. So, like I said in the beginning, the minute you get your feet off the ground and you're sitting on a horse, you're taking your feet off the ground, raising yourself up high, and you're going to immediately have feelings. Whether you're aware of them or not, it's a nervous system response where your nervous system is like, whoa, we're not stable, we're not safe, this isn't cool, how do we keep ourselves from falling down? Well, when you're unstable or you're anxious, I'm glad you like my shirt, Ashley. It's my favorite philosophy in life, and one that I adhere to. Just kidding. When you're feeling unstable, you tend to contract and rotate, right? So remember fetal mode. I always think of fetal mode as an extreme, but we do fetal mode when we're riding in various smaller ways. Fetal mode is retracting and coming forward, right? And if you think about yourself when your instructor asks you to canter, that's not that far from actual fetal mode, right? It's, oh, I don't really want to canter, but I kind of have to make the horse, but I don't really want to, right? That's your body trying to keep you from falling off. I wrote a post about this on Facebook of taking my daughter onto those zip line thingies, and you bet I was in fetal mode. I wanted to crawl on the ground on my hands and knees because I was feeling so unstable, right? And so when you contract your body to the center line, you can actually provide yourself some stability. So unfortunately, when we ride a horse, that's not really an ideal position to be in to allow the horse to feel stable themselves. And where this gets tricky is if I'm up in the sky on a zip line, moving like this can give me stability. That is what my nervous system is designed to do. That's what generations and generations of genetics have allowed my brain to be able to do to keep me safe, because my ancestors were able to survive to produce me because they didn't die, because they used their instincts, right? But on a horse, that no longer serves us, because we have to combat or work with is a better term. We have to work with the horse's nervous system. So if we understand that we are inherently trying to survive by using our hands to grab and using our upper bodies to contract, we also have to understand that the horse is using their nervous system to run, buck, kick, bolt, etc. In other words, to be able to move is what makes them feel safe. And so here we have two nervous systems designed to do two different things. Us to grab and contract, them to run and be able to move. And those two things do not work well together, because when we bring our grabbing and contracting to a horse who feels inhibited in movement, their movements can become very explosive, making us less safe. So these two things do not work together. So the horse is not capable of changing their nature because they're a horse. We have big frontal lobes and logic and reasoning and so on. And so unfortunately, the burden falls on us to be able to change the way we sit and approach and handle and manage our bodies on the horse. The problem here, though, is that you can't fight against your nervous system. So you can't fake it until you make it. In other words, if you are feeling unstable on the horse at the nervous system level, more repetitions of trying to make your leg lengthen, trying to make your hands still, they are always going to be incongruent with your center. And so what I teach people when I teach them how to ride, or what I advise people when they're having trouble with fear, is twofold. Part of it is your body, but the other part is the horse's body. So to some degree, when you get on a horse and you're like, whoa, I don't feel good, this feels unstable, there is some degree of your nervous system picking up on how unstable this horse feels. Because quite a few horses that people ride are actually quite weak, quite unstable, very unbalanced, and very crooked. And it's quite possible that your nervous system is trying to tell you that by making you scrunch and squeeze, or your fear of the canter could potentially be that the horse's canter is actually quite unbalanced. And we really disregard this because horses are very good at covering up. They're very good at compensating. They're extremely good at getting things done. If you look at high level performance horses, they might be jumping 6 feet, but they could very well be also lame, right? That's a very common thing that happens where these horses have rotational falls over jumps, or school horses that fall in the canter around corners. And the kids or adults who are learning to ride on them often are nervous to canter because they feel that potential for risk is very high. So if you're struggling with that contraction and gripping and fear, part of it, or a good part of it, could very well be that the horse is not stable and you're picking up on that. And so I usually advise riders not to ride through fear, which might be controversial advice. But if you're feeling fear overtly, that's big enough for you to take notice of it, right? You're scared enough that you're aware that you're scared and it's making you contract. That's a high level of fear. That's when it's big enough to be recognizable for you. So if you're that afraid, big part of it could very well be that the horse is not stable. The other part is us, how we sit in the saddle. It's unfortunate that learning to sit centered is kind of rare. There are definitely some good riding schools that teach it, but a lot of us learn to ride. If I think back to my first lessons, the first lessons were make the horse go, make the horse turn, make a figure, walk, trot, canter, start jumping. And so I never actually learned how to sit or absorb the horse's movement. I learned how to make horses do things. And so as I elevated in my riding ability, my faults became higher and higher. I'm just using myself as an example, but this is common. So by the time I was jumping, I was pinching with my knees, holding on with my reins, all kinds of riding faults that happened because I was never taught how to actually sit. And I'm not talking about like put your shoulder above your hip, learn to sit. I'm talking about actually integrating your body into the movement of the horse's body, where every step you learn how to absorb through your center. And so you become lower and lower in your center of gravity, safer and safer, and we would call it a supple seat, one that could absorb motion of the horse. The lower your center of gravity, the more supple your seat gets, the more open your hips get. The lower your center of gravity gets, your nervous system starts to perceive this movement as safe. And then you start to relax your limbs, right? Your arms and your legs no longer need to scrunch. But I never learned that when I was young. When I was learning to ride, I learned how to make horses do stuff. And so in order to make horses do stuff, I had to learn how to compensate by making it happen with complete disregard to my center. And so I never learned how to breathe deeply, as Dean is saying there in the comment about breathing deeply when you sit on the saddle. I never learned how to breathe deeply. I didn't learn about being centered. And so the higher the skill set became, the higher the riding level became, the worse my faults get, which I actually see is still super common. So when I teach beginners to ride today, the first thing that I teach them to do is just to sit, to feel the movement of the horse underneath them, to find where their center is, to get their right hip into the saddle, the left hip into the saddle, to do this at the walk, to do that on the lunge line. And then before making more changes, make sure they're very comfortable at the walk with different tempos. So lengthening the stride, shortening the stride. When they're very comfortable following all that movement instead of getting rigid and kind of freezing or rotating, then we take that into the trot. But I teach riders to absorb movement of the horse and to be able to go with it before they ever take control over the reins and the legs. Because the more we start focusing on making the horse do stuff, the more our center gets thrown out of the picture and we start thinking about making the horse do stuff. And like I was talking about with the inside rein, we start thinking about getting ready to turn right and we think of it like this, right? So those faults become more and more ingrained and your nervous system actually begins to register that as your center. And so you take a rider who perpetually sits on their crotch like this with a rotation or the inside leg up, and you teach them to get their center into the saddle and to relax their hips and to open their legs and let them hang. And they actually can feel very, very unstable because those have become their protective mechanisms for security. Those have become their compensation mechanisms so that they don't fall down. So learning to relearn how to ride, if you've developed these habits, is going to be a lot of painstaking repetition of finding your center and learning to kind of understand where center is. So instead of memorizing a look, now it's actually finding a feeling. Can you feel the right leg under you? Can you feel the left leg under you? Can you move with that feeling? And that might be really intimidating for a long time. I've started a lot of young horses, and I did it through getting a done seat. You know, you kind of get into this defensive position when you're starting young horses pretty easily of being ready to be bucked off and trying to get defensive against them, right? And so when I started having to learn to sit centered after that, I felt very fearful for the first time because I was letting go of all my compensations, right? The wide hands and the kind of backward seat makes it so that if the horse is going to do something, I'm ready for it, right? But I'm also not in any position to get their backs to feel good, to get them to bend well, to be able to be a weight load that is not burdensome for them to carry. So learning to move in rhythm over the horse's back is a very good way to start to let your nervous system integrate into the horse. So just like we use rhythm to educate the horse to relax their compensation patterns, using rhythm for riders is very, very helpful to teach them to breathe deeply. It's very helpful for teaching them to find center. And once they can absorb those movements, I'm going to stand up again. I'm sorry for making you guys dizzy. Once they can absorb those movements without having the reins involved, without having to worry about making the horse do something, that's when I start teaching people to use their aids, hands and legs, with center. So let's say this is the horse that's sitting underneath me right here. I would want my right hip and my left hip over the horse's sides. So here would be the withers, and I would want half of me on each side. So that already makes me feel more stable. Whereas if I'm like this, I'm going to have to contract so that I don't fall off or use the rein to keep myself stable because we're upper body we use a lot for stability. So we have to combat that when we're learning to ride by getting our weight down and relaxed. So thinking again, the center line, I like to think of spreading, wide, and tall. that keeps me out of this fetal mode and into a I'm feeling safe mode. I'm getting more a weight load down, right? And then once I can do this on a straight line, then I start teaching riders that when they turn, instead of thinking of a turn from here to here, like I'm going to turn right, I start saying turn to a visual, turn from here to here to here to here. And that produces a rider that can then turn like this through their center, where their reins are congruent with their center instead of this thing. So we stop doing rein riding and we start riding from center. And what that does to the leg is it puts the leg in the position that we would want for a bend anyway. So we don't need to put inside leg, outside rein, inside for flexion, and so on, because you can see how jumbled that gets. Instead, we can say horse is centered. I'm centered over the horse. If I ride clearly in rhythm, I can turn the horse onto a right bend without getting my center all cattywampus. And that allows my legs to be really relaxed. That allows the horse to be able to breathe deeply as well because I'm not close pinned around his rib cage. And that allows me to give softer aids that are more, what's the word I'm looking for? Less severe. They're much more invisible. You can give invisible aids. I can breathe deeply and keep the horse relaxed. And the cool thing about that is the more I breathe and the better I move, the calmer my horse gets. So the less defensive I feel, the less defensive the horse feels, and pretty soon we're both relaxing together. And when you can learn how to do that on a nervous horse, you can calm the nervous horse down. And that really takes away from the need to ride defensively because your body is calming the horse's body. And the horse's body is calming your body. And we have this big, fun, happy circle of calmness. And I didn't really believe in that when my teacher taught me because I was like, no way am I going to let this horse buck me off. But I have learned over time that if you ride better, more centered, more calm, breathing deeply, it gives a feeling to the horse of stability and makes them less defensive against you. So it's not to say it's a replacement against training, but it definitely can help. And sometimes conversely, if we are tight and the horse, we get on a nice calm horse, sometimes we signal to that horse we get on, hey, things are not okay, I'm defensive, and the horses start to heighten their suspicion of us, and they become more and more fractious pretty quickly. So those three positional faults all stem from the same root, and that root is an unstable center and a nervous system that's feeling inherently unsafe. And I say that not to let us off of the hook that, if you're having trouble with those aids, doesn't necessarily mean you're off the hook for practicing. But it does mean that more repetition of fixing those things as symptomatic pieces is not necessarily going to fix the root. So for example, if you know your inside rein keeps coming back, just repeatedly telling yourself to put it here is not necessarily a good fix if your nervous system is not part of the solution. So getting with a really good coach who understands this is super valuable. Getting with somebody who understands the horse's movement just as much as your movement is super valuable. Learning to breathe deeply all the way down is super valuable. And learning to move rhythmically is super, super valuable because it gives a whole feeling of safety to everybody. But as I said before, half of the battle, if you get on a horse and you start getting contracted, a lot of it is your nervous system telling you we're not safe. And those are feelings that are not to be ignored, in my opinion. And I think that a lot of the advice for rider fear completely throws out nervous systems of horses and people. It's, telling people, I used to do that when I was younger. I used to tell riders that were fear, you just need to go out and canter more, right? It's kind of like saying, now I understand this better. It's kind of like saying, if you're afraid of being chased by a bear, just go get chased by more bears until you're not afraid of it, right? Your nervous system is trying to do its job and you keep putting yourself back in danger. And so if you're feeling unsafe, that's something to definitely listen to. It's your body's and your brain's way of saying something's not right for us to feel stable. It's either me or the horse or both. But generally speaking, when we get to the root cause, not only does our body become more beautifully open, more centered, we can use more subtle aids. We can ride more effectively. We're not so worried about we're not worried about what the horse is going to do, but instead we can actually guide the horse. We suddenly have a lot more energy to guide the horse as opposed to always always riding reactively. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Too fast, too slow, too, reactive riding never allows us the mental space to actually guide the horse. And when we're reacting to the horse, we can make the horse much more nervous, much more tense, much more crooked, causing us to overuse our aids. So learning to actually guide and cause a horse to be wanting to follow us requires that we can get centered, we can feel safe on the horse, and we can give the horse a feeling of safety as well. So that's all I have for you. I'll show you those pictures again. Right here. Took me forever to draw these, so you like them. There we have the scrunching leg, the pulling inside rein, and the crotch riding. And that is not all of the faults that one could make, but they are very common and they all stem from the same thing. Do I have a virtual riding course? Yes, I do. I just finished filming it yesterday. The virtual riding course is available for anyone who has taken my Calm Forward and Straight or in-hand course. So you need to have the preliminary in-hand or lunging done for reasons I mentioned in the call today, which is that you want the horse to be in a position where they can move that way first. That's what we teach on the ground. Then in the riding course that I just finished making, the riding course addresses all of that stuff. So the riding course is going to teach you how to get centered, how to hold your reins, how to put your feet in the stirrups. It's very, very fundamental and basic, but I find that it addresses a lot of the missing pieces that people didn't learn. And it's through no fault of your own necessarily. Sometimes it's hard to get an instructor to break those things down because a lot of instructors assume you already can or know how to do that. A lot of very gifted instructors already can do that and they don't think about breaking it down to that level. So in that course, that's what I'll teach you how to do is how to center your seat, how to follow the horse's motion, how to look where you're going and bring the horse with you. Very simple, very basic stuff, but in my observation, desperately needed. I know I needed it desperately too. So, yeah, I'm glad you liked the expression of the artwork. Thank you, Elizabeth. And in the video library, I am working also to get more writing videos up as soon as I can too. There's a small handful of those in the writing section, but there will be more coming quite quickly. I have quite a few in-hand videos in there that will help you get started. And as I keep producing content, it'll hopefully get the whole picture. But did I miss any questions here? Do you guys have any questions? If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. Otherwise, we can call it a day. And this recording, when it's done, will be available on my Facebook for, I think, 30 days. Facebook Live keeps them. You are welcome, Courtney. Could I review the community options? You're talking about the video library? Yeah, I don't have that in front of me. Let me look real quick. So the video library has 3 tiers. Let me see if I can pull this up on time before everybody gets bored of watching me type. The video library comes with 3 tiers. The bottom tier is just the video library. Here it is. Bottom tier is just the video library. That is called in-hand tier. This comes with a 7-day trial, so if you want to check it out, you're welcome to. 7-day free trial. In-hand tier gives you access to the video library. The second tier is called the self-carriage tier, and that gives you access to a community, which I use off Facebook so that, Facebook can't shut anything down. If somebody types a word they don't like, Facebook. This is completely off of Facebook. It's very easy to use, very simple. The video library, the second tier comes with the community. We get monthly Q&As. You get 50% off all of my courses while you're a member. And then the third tier is Schoolmaster subscriber, and that comes with 3 hours of monthly coaching, and then a custom rehab or progress plan built by me. There's a question I missed here. Are the riding So the riding videos are in the video library. So in any tier you get, the riding videos are in there. I'm going to be continuing to add more, but the riding course is not included in the video library. But if you are in the self-carriage tier or higher, you get 50% off of all courses. So that would be 50% off for you. What would I ask a potential instructor? Um, well, I would want to know where you are trying to head to. What are your goals? And I would try to make those very clear to your instructor and ask them if they are compatible with those goals. Um, I would ask if you have fear. I would ask how they handle fear. What is your plan for handling rider fear? And I would ask or watch how they handle their school horses, how they handle beginners. I would want to know how they treat riders who are afraid. I would want to know what their plan is for progressing people's seats and skill sets. And I would want to see how the school horses move and look. Um, so I don't think you have to have someone, super crazy educated to teach a beginner rider, but they do have to have compassion and understanding for how immensely unnatural it is to put the human body through riding. Everything that we do on a horse's back is the opposite of all of our instincts. So somebody who's teaching you to ride needs to understand your body and your brain. And I think a big struggle for a lot of amateurs riding is that most riding instructors are young and have been riding their whole lives, and they don't understand amateurs that have been riding late in life. They don't understand fear. They don't understand the risk that you have when you're older, when you have kids, and that kind of thing. So I would want an instructor who understood where you're coming from and what you wanted, at the very least. As for the schoolmaster tier, you don't have to meet any criteria. That is just for very dedicated students who really want to have a plan going forward. I currently have all of those spots filled, but there's a wait list going, and whenever those open up, all you have to do is apply. Did I miss any other questions? I think I caught all up on. You're welcome, Wanda. Trying to think of what else I would ask an instructor, but I think that's it. What have you done with clients who are just not patient enough to learn to ride correctly or get their horses balanced and posturally correct? Oof, that's a tough one. When I was younger, I really didn't understand how to explain to clients what to expect. So I hoped that they saw things like I did and got frustrated when they didn't. And over time, I have learned, I don't take training horses anymore, but when I last did, I had a great group of clients because I got better at explaining to them exactly what the process entailed, a general length of time, a general cost, and a general expectation from the client. And so I stopped really getting people who were interested in that. If they weren't interested in, I mean, I stopped getting people who weren't interested in that. So people didn't tend to want to be part of my program when I laid out in the structure. Like if you call me and say, hey, I want you to help train my horse or I want to learn to ride, I would then say, what are your goals? And here's what that entails. Do you want in or not? Right. And so if they weren't interested in that, they tended to either not follow up with me or drop off pretty quickly. So a big part of that was just laying out the expectation that here is what it takes to be a good rider. And I try to relay to people often that I have been studying intensely under a teacher for more than 10 years. And I still study intensely, and that's what it takes to be really good at this because you can't just come in when you feel like it, right? Depending on your goal and your how high you want to get to your in your riding. But if you bring me a horse who's really painful or who's really crooked or who's really weak, I'm not going to be able to make it bend in one day. So I think laying out that expectation initially is really important. But if they get really frustrated, then I often will refer them to somebody else or try to explain um, why we don't jive. But yeah, it's hard to teach people what to expect with learning to ride correctly because um, we don't see the work going into it. If you see a horse that's being ridden well, you see the end result often, but you don't always see how much time the rider who's riding it learned to do that and how much time the horse who's being ridden was trained to do that. And so we often miss the um, how you learn to bake and just look at the bakery glass and say, well, that looks good. I want that. So it is extremely hard, especially when you don't have a lot of other people in your community leading by example. When you're the only trainer in the area doing it that way, it can be very isolating and be frustrating. When I was running training, I had people coming from out of the local area to work with me, but not nearly as many local people. So sometimes it's kind of just putting your message out there as correctly and accurately to what you want to see. Not that I'm a business coach, but that's what worked for me. Was being as accurate to what you wanted to have, and then trying to attract people who are interested, and then you will also repel people who are not a good fit. All right, you guys. I'll give you another minute to type up questions. If anybody's typing furiously, I don't want to end the call while you're in the middle of your question. But also another, I forgot to mention this, another big part of learning to ride centered for me was learning in hand work. And when I learned in hand work, I learned the habits on the ground that I was supposed to have under saddle, and that made it so much easier to translate. Because a huge part of in hand work is not just getting the horse balanced, but getting yourself balanced so that you are essentially riding from the ground. You're learning to get your hips level when you ask for something. You're learning not to lean and twist or pull the horse's head around, and you're learning to get yourself aligned with what you want the horse to do first. And that makes an enormous difference for getting in the saddle, because then those habits that you've developed in the ground where it's safe and you're less worried about your stability, and you're less worried about controlling the horse because the horse is less likely to buck you off when you're on the ground. Learning those habits in hand can translate a lot more easily to riding once they're part of your muscle memory. All right, you guys, thank you for your time. Thanks for hanging out with me for a little bit. And this recording will be up on my feed for 30 days, I think. And I'm sure I'll come up with another idea in the near future to do another live with. So thank you guys, and I will catch you later.